Relationships with avoidance tend to follow a similar pattern, especially if you're dealing with a severely dismissive avoidant or a fearful avoidant that leans heavily dismissive. Let's get into that pattern. Let's get into those phases, starting with the first phase. The first phase is the shared fantasy. That's because it is a fantasy. It's the love bombing phase. It is the infatuation phase. The avoidant has not had their fears triggered yet because there is no actual emotional intimacy. There's no real commitment. There's no conflicts. Their biggest triggers, closeness, commitment, and conflict, have not been triggered yet. The dopamine is flowing in the avoidance brain, so is oxytocin. Those are the feel-good chemicals that especially go off early in dating. The avoidant has spent a lifetime of bottling up and suppressing emotions because they've learned to avoid, and that stems from consistent childhood emotional neglect. Growing up in households where you don't talk about feelings and their own feelings were routinely rejected and dismissed. Stoic households. They weren't given the love and nurturing that they needed. So they developed these fears. Fears of rejection, fears of abandonment, fears of losing themselves in a relationship to somebody who's going to reject and abandon them. And closeness, emotional intimacy, commitment, and conflict are the main triggers for those fears. So those haven't been triggered yet. It's too early. And the avoidant is thinking they got it right this time too. I finally got it right. This is the right person. They're making me feel wonderful. And they're letting all those bottled up emotions flow out onto you because they are feeling good. They are in the fantasy world. It's a romance novel. It's a fairy tale. It's not a real relationship yet because there's no real emotional intimacy. There's no real serious commitment. And there's no conflict. It's too early for that. And there's a connection and a chemistry that is out of this world, and you are feeling good too. And they're likely telling you things like nobody ever made them feel this way before, that they really see a future with you, and they may be going so far as to plan a future, talk about your future together, future places you'll go, houses you'll buy, the family you might have, and it feels wonderful. The problem is, due to their insecurities and their complete lack of self-awareness due to a lack of self-reflection, they're not able to maintain this phase. And then eventually it moves into the fault-finding phase. Let's get into that next. The next phase is the fault-finding phase, and it comes after the shared fantasy wears off. The dopamine levels have come down and the avoidant is having their fears triggered. That's because there is real emotional intimacy building. That's closeness. You're getting to know each other and there's feelings developing on both sides, but you're especially expressing your feelings for them, which is quite triggering to them because that means vulnerability, sharing emotions, sharing feelings. It's very scary. They've learned from childhood that closeness is unsafe. They personalize that childhood emotional neglect, thinking that there's something wrong with them, that they're defective and unlovable. So that's why they have these walls up, because their subconscious fear in their unconscious mind is that if I let down my walls and I let my partner in, and I let real closeness build, my partner is going to figure me out. They are going to figure out that I'm defective, not lovable, that I'm worthless. So emotional closeness to them is associated with abandonment, but emotional distance feels safe. So now their fears are triggered, and there might be commitment, actual real commitment, which is very triggering to them because they associate that with abandonment as well. And there might be conflict, which they also associate with rejection and abandonment because they couldn't express their feelings as a kid. They would get their feelings rejected and dismissed. Well, now they're feeling the urge to run, but they don't really have a complete awareness of why because they also avoid self-reflection. So what they're doing is they are looking for faults in you, their partner. And they could be very minuscule, petty things, but they are desperately searching for faults that they can pin their anxiety on, that they can pin their urge to run. Well, I love Italian food, but they don't. Or I like scary movies, but they prefer action flicks. Little things like that to say, oh, look, there's a difference here. We're fundamentally incompatible. I don't like the way this person drinks their coffee. They're an early bird and I'm a night owl. Looking for any faults that they can find in their partner. Because when they find those faults, now they can blame their fears on their partner. Now they can blame the urge to run on their partner, and they don't have to take accountability. They don't have to self-reflect, and they feel justified for what comes next. Now, many avoidants will internalize the fault finding. They won't even express it to you out of fear of conflict, fear of rejection. However, some will express that to their partner, finding little criticisms in everything their partner does to create emotional distance, because when you're constantly criticizing the other person, it's hard to build closeness. And when they do vocalize this fault finding, it can come across a lot like narcissistic devaluation, where you're on eggshells and everything you do is wrong. But the motivating factor is much different. Now, the narcissist is trying to put themselves in the power position over you. The avoidant is trying to justify their fears and avoid self-reflection to justify them exiting the relationship. And the next phase is the breakup, the discard. Well, now they've found fault with you, and they've been able to pinpoint it in their mind that it's your fault that they feel the urge to run away, even though it's specifically healthy, normal relationship behaviors that actually trigger them. But they don't want to come to terms with that because accountability is too painful, because in their mind, saying I did something wrong would be confirming their own inner defectiveness. They don't want to go there, they want to avoid it. So now that they've pinned it on you, they're bottling that in until the anxiety reaches a breaking point. And that's when they end the relationship. And they can do it with a slow fade out to try to get you to break up with them so they don't have to be the bad guy. Or they can abruptly pull the rug from under your feet, blindside you, and leave you with a devastated, broken heart, without any warning or communication whatsoever. They deactivate when this happens. They take their feelings to their partner, they completely stuff them and detach from them. They do this to keep themselves safe because they've learned emotions are unsafe. But due to a lack of self-awareness, they think they've just fallen out of love. They don't realize that they've actually suppressed the emotions to keep themselves safe, even though it's maladaptive. And it can be blindsiding, and it's usually without closure and without empathy. And it's very painful to be on the receiving end of, because you're getting little to no explanation as to why the relationship had to end. Just vague surface level excuses. It's blindsiding, it's painful, and it can be considered absolutely a discard. It is earth-shattering. It is not a normal breakup whatsoever, but it's due to the avoidance fears and insecurities. It's not actually due to anything that you did wrong if you are a consistent and loving partner. And keep in mind, consistent, loving partners are what trigger them. Now, there is one more stage that can happen in a lot of cases, and that's the breadcrumbing stage. The avoidant now, well, they've taken emotional distance, they've discarded you from the relationship, they haven't heard from you in a while, and they're missing your validation, and they want to know that you still want them because they rely heavily on external validation to feel better about themselves. So they might start watching your social media stories, liking your posts, or even texting you little nothings of like, hey, just thinking of you, or missing you, or maybe even just sending you a meme or something like that. And then when you take the bait and you show that you miss them and still want them, they feel validated, and then they can pull back again because they just want to know that you're still an option pining away for them, because it makes them feel better. Plus, when you validate them, well, that confirms to them that you don't hate them, so they're not the bad guy, and it helps them avoid accountability. At the end of the day, this cycle is because of their insecurities, their choices, and yes, also their character. It's not a reflection of you or your worth as a partner.